Then we looked inside South Africa's B20 lead-up and what preparation is crucial to avoid redundancy in global recommendations. Cas Coovadia, Sherpa of B20, joined me to unpack that build-up.
When we started out with this, we said to ourselves, we've never done this before.
Yeah.
And we're not going to do it again. Not the people involved, anyway,
Yeah.
right? And so, one, we had to understand exactly what it is, because what was quite interesting was that when we started out, there were very few C-suite people in this country that knew about the B20 actually. They knew something about the G20.
Yes.
But they knew nothing about the B20 and the importance of the B20. So I think that to prepare ourselves by being briefed by the previous hosts, Brazil, and I must say that Brazil did a phenomenal job. They gave us a playbook actually.
Yes.
Of their experiences, what they learned, what they did, what they didn't do, and so on. So that helped a great deal. And then to actually look at what sort of resources and capacity are needed to put together a team. And given that this is just for a year, we didn't want to employ people. We got a team through secondment from corporates and so on. And then to put together things like the chairs. You heard from the report that the chairs are critical to this, of the task forces. To approach CEOs to chair and be deputies for this thing.
Yeah.
And once we had all of that in place, to then touch base with the other G20 businesses in the other G20 countries and get them involved and so on. So those preparations were absolutely critical. And finally, beside the team, and again it came out in the report, to get the knowledge partners in place, which are the major management consultancy agencies, who I spoke to them and I asked them, I said, look, this is good for you guys.
Yeah.
You guys need to come on board. And they've all come on board on a pro bono basis, which was great.
Yeah, Cas, it's quite interesting that you highlight that you've never been a part of this, and even with the B20, that there were few C-suite executives that actually knew about the B20. Something actually jumped out at me out of Mxolisi Mgojo's speech, that South African companies have global reach while they have local roots. In terms of furthering business interests within the B20, how much business influence does exist in that? And does South African business actually have the muscle that could shape legacy beyond the G20 presidency of South Africa and beyond the G20 as a structure in itself?
I think South African business does have the muscle, as Mxolisi said, local as well as global.
Yeah.
We have a number of global businesses in this country. We have C-suite people that are recognized globally and respected globally. So I think we do have the clout and we do have the strength to do that. I think that we also have a responsibility, given that the last country from the global south, in the last 4 years, consecutively there's been countries from the global south, and now we hand over to the north, and it won't come to the south again in about 15 to 20 years' time. So we have that responsibility to also look at creating a legacy for the global south as well as a legacy for the continent. And that's why we put the continent at the center of the SAB20, as the government did for the SAG20. So I think that we have the capacity to do so, we have the clout to do so. And I think we have to do so. Because we can't, as representatives of business in particular, the B20, we can't have a situation where the B20 becomes an annual policy talk shop with no results, with no impact. And so to create those legacies, to also put together some sort of mechanism to track these recommendations and to track impact, I think, to me, the critical deliverable of the B20 in South Africa, and we're working quite hard on that.
Cas, it was highlighted that B20 recommendations don't guarantee policy impact. What does that speak to? And I'm wondering if there are maybe certain clashes between business interests, B20 interests, and G20 priorities, or maybe the business landscape could be clashing with some political priorities in there? Is there alignment? What is the gap exactly?
Well, look, I don't think there's total alignment. I mean, in the first place, in developing the B20 recommendations, we have to try and look at the priorities of the various business formations in the G20 countries. And we were very clear in our guidance to our chairs that we don't want to get into consensus paralysis. Okay, the recommendation that come out must be worth the paper written on, must actually be impactful. And I think the chairs, together with the knowledge partners, the co-chairs, did a phenomenal job in bringing those countries together, bringing those priorities together, and coming out with pretty good recommendations. So that's the first part. Then once we start talking to the G20 about the recommendations, we need to recognize that the G20 countries politically aren't in the same place.
Yes.
And don't have the similar priorities. And that's why what we try to do is, even though putting Africa at the center, we try to look at recommendations to grow the continent, to develop the continent, that are also important for the G20 countries. So the continent has the mineral resources and other resources which, if properly exploited, and if the continent is enabled to actually develop those and value add those minerals, they are important for the gig economy and the AI economy that the G20 countries are leading currently. In many G20 countries, the working age population is going down because of an aging population. Africa has the youth population that can actually close that gap, so develop Africa's youth population. So we've always sent home the message that it's not just the development of Africa, it's development of the globe. And that then resonates with the other G20 countries, right? And that then begins to find synergies between the priorities of the G20 countries and the priorities of Africa and South Africa.
Yeah.
And that enables us to sort of navigate our way through the G20 priorities and try to bring about some sort of alignment.
Yeah. Cas, something interesting also jumped out at me, that there are these recurrent themes in terms of the areas of focus and in different policy cycles, right? And it's been highlighted that they keep coming up because they are important, not necessarily that there is no progress being made. But are there institutionalized structures and mechanisms to track progress, but also accommodating the fact that progress is uneven when looking at the different regions?
Yeah, so there aren't institutional mechanisms, and that's one of the things we're trying to do. So neither the B20 nor the G20 has a secretariat.
Yeah.
Right, so essentially the host country does what it wants to do, right? Again, representing business, we felt that it's necessary to develop some sort of mechanism to track what happens to the recommendation, but also to those recommendations that are being implemented, what the impact of the implementation is, right? And so we, working with Brazil, America, and as soon as the 2027 host is announced, we'll include them to see if we can develop some sort of mechanism to do that. We've also been talking to India because they, during their term, developed a B20 Institute, which didn't get off the ground because they just had Indian board members and so on. And when I was in India a month or two ago, my counterpart there, the Sherpa, said, look, they're prepared to put the institute at our disposal with some sort of capacity, and we could perhaps use that as a platform to do this. So that is important. And then I think that, you know, the tradition of the B20 has been that close on, usually there's 8 task forces, and 6 of the task forces go from one B20 to the other. And that's because they are complex and there are slow policy discussions to be had. But like I said in my panel, that we do need to be quite robust about looking at each task force. And if the policy discussions have been had, then let's not have that task force. Let's then say that on trade and investment as an example, if the policy discussions have been had, let's replace that with another task force where we need policy development and concentrate on implementing the recommendation that came out of the previous host on trade and investment. And I think that's the sort of principle we need to adopt, and we would certainly in future hosts of the B20 try to encourage that.
That was Cas Coovadia, Sherpa for B20.